Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, wherever you are in the world. It is game 14 of the World Championship match between Jan Nepomniachtchi from Russia against Ding Liren from China. It has been an incredible match so far. Topsy-turvy, a lot of exciting chess. And right now, as we are entering the final round of classical chess, round 14, the score stands at 6.5 to 6.5. It's all tied, and it's all coming down to this final game. We should start with the obvious, and that is, of course, Fabiano will not be joining me today. It was just a very long day at the office. He's doing the commentary for the official broadcast on chess.com, and unfortunately, he wasn't able to join me after. But for the sake of continuity, I will be doing this recap. So let's get straight into it and see what the players have in store for us. With the white pieces, of course, it's Ding Liren. He starts with the move d4, knight to f6, c4, e6, knight to c3. He chooses the Nimzo. We've seen knight to f3 in previous games, d5, and this interesting idea of h3. Of course, we also said that we're probably never going to see that ever happen in this match, and indeed, it never happened. Knight to c3, bishop to b4, e3, a very typical way of combating the Nimzo. Of course, you can do knight to f3, you can do bishop to d2, you can play a lot of moves, but e3 is indeed one of the main lines and considered at this point in time to be one of the most testing moves for black. Castle, bishop to d2. This is the first, let's say, mini surprise in this game. We've seen a3 from Ding in the game that he felt he was most likely in a must-win situation. And we've seen that crazy game that Nepo saved in the end after bishop to c3, b takes c3, a crazy game. Ding came with this idea of rook to a2 later on in the middle game. That was indeed a very beautiful preparation by Team Ding. They got the result out of the opening, but unfortunately for him, he was unable to convert what it was most likely a pretty much decisive advantage. Big opportunity missed in that particular game for Ding. Nevertheless, we did not expect to see a3 because the lines that were ensuing after that one were just simply too forced. And we knew that Nepo, and he showed it himself, Nepo was ready for those. He didn't have too many problems out of the opening. He just didn't know what to do immediately once his knowledge stopped. But of course, entering this game, probably he would have known what to do. Ding decides to deviate first with a move bishop to d2, a d5. Of course, black can play in a lot of ways. d5 is one of the main lines. c5 is an option as well. b6 is an option as well, and it has been considered to be one of the topical lines in this particular position. d5, a3. Of course, the idea of bishop to d2 is to meet bishop takes c3 with bishop takes c3. It's a very simple and very basic idea. What I'm trying to get is the two bishops with a better structure. I don't want to recapture on c3 with the b pawn because, that's going to give you compensation for the two bishops. You're going to have a better structure. That's why white plays this move bishop to d2. Now, on the other hand, with the pawn already on d5, black has the extra option of just retreating the bishop on e7. Without the pawn on d5, if you play the move a3 first, you're forced more or less to take on c3, because if you don't and play bishop to e7 with the pawn on d7, white would just simply be able to play e4 and take full control of the center. You don't want to see that in the position as black. So he plays bishop to e7, knight to f3, c5, immediately blasting open the center, trying to take advantage of the fact that the bishop is on d2 and not necessarily on a particularly good square, at least not for the moment. You would love, for example, after take, bishop takes c5, which happened in the game, to be able to play the move b4 followed by bishop to b2. Unfortunately, your bishop is already on d2, not on the right diagonal. He played queen to c2, Ding that is, and by the way, take a look at the time. Ding came and deviated first with a move bishop to d2, but it was Nepo who was better prepared for this particular line. He was blitzing out his moves, and I was watching live as well. He definitely felt like he knows what he's doing. He played d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and now knight b to d7. Of course, what you want as black in this position is, and by the way, what is one of your only problem in the position is the bishop on c8. If you would be able to transfer the bishop somewhere on the long diagonal, for example, b7, if you can play b6, castle, and bishop to b7, at this point, you have absolutely no problems. In fact, most likely not only that you equalized out of the opening, but maybe you're even better with the black pieces out of the opening, despite the symmetrical structure. So what white needs to do to maintain an edge out of the opening is stop black from getting the bishop on the long diagonal, activating the bad bishop on c8. Of course, another way, and you might be asking, why don't I just activate it on this diagonal by playing the move e5? Well, the problem with the move e5 is that it comes with consequences. And those consequences are that, of course, you're not going to play e5 right now. Let's say knight to c6, castle, and now e5. Sure, you opened up the bishop, you're ready to go bishop g4, bishop h5, threaten bishop takes f3, get the bishop on a nice diagonal, challenge the queen on c2. Everything seems to be looking quite nice for black. The problem is, once you play this move e5, you're giving me a lot of squares in the center, particularly this square on d5. So I can also just simply stop you from playing bishop to g4, which in fact is most likely the best move in the position. Then I go rook to d1, then I go bishop to e1, and then I finally land a nice horsey on the square d5. And unfortunately for you, despite the fact that you opened up the diagonal for the bishop, it still doesn't have useful squares. On f5 you cannot go. If you try to get ready for that with a move g6, the problem is whenever you go bishop to f5, I can just move my queen, and you made a lot more weaknesses with this move g6, a lot of dark square weaknesses around the king. You don't want to see that on the board. So let's get back to the game. After bishop to c4, once again, b6 looks like the most natural option in the position. There is a big problem with this move, and that is the move knight to e4. Knight to e4, if you go bishop to b7, now I can just simply take on c5, get the two bishops, get the better structure, and take the advantage in the position. If you take on e4, then I can just simply take with the queen on e4. And right now, unfortunately, you didn't have time to set up this bishop on the long diagonal. You have some problems because of the rook being stuck on a8. So let's get back to the game. This move knight to e4 unfortunately is a bit problematic. You can still play knight bd7 and allow me to take on c5. That's going to be two bishops. That's going to be a long-term advantage. And perhaps this is exactly what Ding wanted to see in this game. But Jan was ready for it. He played the move knight bd7, rook to d1, bishop to e7, get this bishop off of this c5 square. To be honest, I'm not 100% sure why at this point he did not play the move b6, but perhaps b6 also knight to e4 would or was perhaps the move that he was worried about. Because again, if you go bishop to e7, I can go knight f, g5, start looking at knight takes f6, bishop to c3 with the rook on d1. I have some threats against your king with the inclusion of this activity on the d file. So you don't want to see that. And this is exactly what Nepo, why did I say Nepo? Nepo did not want to see as well. He played bishop to e7, knight to g5, and this is where Ding, with everything on the line, game 14, any single mistake can cost you not a game, but the match, the title. The title is not yours. You lose the title if you make a mistake. And yet he's taking incredible risks in this position. And I have to say, I was looking at this game and I remember I had this moment in my career as well at a much smaller scale. Of course, it was at the European Youth Championship. I think it was under 18 or something along those lines. I was playing with the gold medal in the last round. I had the white pieces. And all I did in that game was just take unnecessary risks. Of course, my opponent punished me, he beat me. I went down to like 9th place or something along those lines. Everything was lost. But I just wanted to throw the pieces at my opponent. And it seems like this is exactly what Ding was feeling as well. He didn't want to calculate too much. There was so much pressure, so much tension accumulated in the previous 13 rounds that at this point, he was just making the wrong decisions. I can only attribute it to pressure. H6, And h4. Of course, once you say A, you have to say B. Well, you don't actually have to say B, but Ding, as I was mentioning, probably was feeling those type of emotions, just wanted to kill his opponent. He played the move h4, an unnecessary risk, in my opinion, and I do believe that Nepo was likely feeling the same emotions as well. He was looking at this move h4, and we could see it on the broadcast. He had a smirk. He understood that white Ding is giving him some chances to potentially be better with the black pieces and maybe even win this game and win the world title. Queen to c7, a very good move by a Nepo. Not b6. You don't have time to go a b6 because now I go knight to c4. And this was the idea of Ding. Knight c4, you cannot take back on e4 and after that defend the mate with knight to f6 because, well, unfortunately, this is a double attack. You're also losing the rook on a8. If you go bishop to b7, try to cover up this long diagonal, well, there's a problem. I will take on f6 and everything ties together nicely. Knight takes f6, you have to defend against checkmate. And now I have, with the tempo, bishop to c3, threatening to take on f6. If you move the queen, let's say to c7, I can just simply take on f6. And after you take on g5, no, I'm not going to take on e7. I'm going to take on g5. And you're not only losing material, you're just a pawn down at this point. You're getting mated. There is no way for you to stop queen to h7. You can go g6. Well, good luck. The bishop on f6 supports my rook coming to h8, and that's just simply a checkmate in one move. So, unfortunately for Nepo, this was the wildest dream that Ding had in the position. But this player is being so strong, of course, this type of variations will never arise on the board. Still, very beautiful to be shown. Queen to c7. Very good move by Nepomniachtchi. Bishop to e2, and I believe, by the way, taking the queen off the d file, maybe this was something that Ding missed in his assessment as well. For example, why don't you go knight to e4 in the position, right? Still looking at ideas of knight takes f6, bishop to c3, bishop takes f6, just putting some pressure on your opponent and trying to get to that h7, coveted h7 square. If you manage to get the queen there and give the checkmate, well, that's game over. The problem with knight to e4 is that I just simply go knight takes e4, queen takes e4, and now knight to f6. And if you try to go back, let's say to c2, keep connection with the bishop on c4. The problem is I can just simply go bishop to d7. You don't have bishop to c3. If the queen wouldn't be on c7, would be on d8, this game would be over after bishop c3. The problem is with the bishop on c4, bishop to c3 is not possible, and the queen on c7 is standing mightily on the c file. So beautiful move, queen to c7, key move that helps his defense be successful in this particular case. Also making some space potentially for the rook to go to d8 and then put on your running shoes and get the king to f8 in the eventuality that the queen will land on h7. So let's see what he played. Ding played bishop to e2, just getting the bishop out of dodge. Makes perfect sense. Rook to d8, rook to c1. You have to defend the queen on c2 to be able to go knight to e4. There's been a knight hanging on g5 for a very long time. You might be wondering, and maybe I should have explained earlier why you couldn't take on g5 with a pawn. Well, it's quite obvious, in fact. The problem is this is a poisoned knight because right now you're opening up the h file and you cannot simply retreat with the bishop. Let's say with the knight to e8. You're getting checkmated because of the action, the coupled action of the rook on h1, newly opened file, the h file, and the queen landing on h7 with tremendous consequences. That's going to be pretty much a checkmate. Not tremendous, just final consequences. Let's get back to the game. Rook to c1, knight to f8, and I have a feeling that at this point Ding was trying to pull the brakes. He had to pull the brakes. Knight to f8, by the way, maybe not the best move, though I have to say, I believe his missteps started at this point. And I have to drop back a couple of moves because I did not explain a very critical moment, and I will do that right now. This was a very critical moment. Rook to d8 was not the best move. b6 was in fact a very testing move. But in my opinion, maybe It was the nerves that played into Nepo's decision to quite quickly, play the move rook to d8. b6 was a very powerful move. Again, everything is about this idea of getting the bishop active, especially on the long diagonal. But what happens if you go bishop to f3? And perhaps this is what Nepo was wondering himself as well. Bishop to b7 would be an okay move, but then I can just simply take on b7, queen takes b7, and maybe at this point I will drop back with my knight, and most likely, due to the symmetrical pawn structure, is most likely going to go towards an equal position. Perhaps Nepo already was thinking that maybe I should try for more. Now, you can do that. You can definitely try for more after bishop to f3 with the move bishop to a6. This is a beautiful and very thematic exchange sacrifice, because you can take on a8, but then I will just simply take back. I can do that. I can also throw in knight to c5, but we're not going to go necessarily in that direction for the moment, because there's absolutely no reason to do so. I can just simply take on a8. Rook takes a8, and unfortunately, right now the king on e1 is extremely weak. You're in trouble at this point. How do you castle? Well, first of all, you cannot castle because of the bishop on a6. So you have to put a plug on this diagonal. Unfortunately, you cannot do that with the move knight to e2 because you lose the queen. Knight to c5, knight to d3 is a tremendous threat in the position for black. Knight to c5 or knight to e5, get the knight to d3 as fast as possible. And well, to be honest, at this point, coupled with the fact that you also have to be careful not to lose the knight on g5. At some point, once I manage to land something on d3, that's not only going to deliver some very unpleasant checks, but it's also going to deliver a very, very nasty plug of this long diagonal b1, h7, and then I'm going to simply be able to take on g5. Very bad position. White is definitely in trouble at this point. You can try to play moves such as f3. Well, unfortunately, not really. You cannot do that because of queen to g3. That's checkmate in one move. And if you play the move f4, you're leaving behind so many squares. I'm going to continue with the move knight to c5. And once again, the idea of knight to d3 coupled with the fact that I can later on take on g5 and not have to worry about any sort of checkmates on the b1, h7 diagonal, well, that's going to be all she wrote. Tremendous golden opportunity, I have to say, for Nepo to maybe not get a winning position, but get a practically almost winning position with this move b6. This would have been a tremendous move. He did not play it. He played the move rook to d8. Rook to c1, knight to f8, knight to e4, knight takes e4, knight takes e4, queen takes c2. Now we see a bunch of exchanges. It felt like both players are kind of ready to go to the tie breaks, are ready to not attempt any sort of destabilizing motifs in this game. Rook takes c2, bishop to d7, get the bishop to c6, activate the bishop on the long diagonal, finally activate the bishop on the long diagonal. Black still has the upper hand. Why am I saying that? Because you've dedicated so many resources to the attack against my king on g8. You've weakened your position with this move h4. That's going to be a weakness because obviously the bishop on e7 attacks the pawn on h4, and that impedes your ideas of potentially castling, getting king to safety. When you castle, I take the pawn on h4, I'm going to be a pawn up. So that one is a weakness. Also, once the bishop lands on c6, you're going to have some weaknesses on the long diagonal as well, as we will see in the game also. Let's see what happened. Bishop to b4. With this move, it's pretty obvious. Ding is signaling, I want to exchange pieces, I want to make a draw. Bishop takes b4, and now bishop to c6. Makes a lot of sense. Put some pressure on the knight on e4. Everything is very natural. It flows very natural for Nepo. And at this point, Ding had to look at the position and realize that he's worse. So you have to pull the brakes. We've been discussing about this concept of pulling the brakes so many times. Just pull the brakes. Pull the brakes, meaning that whenever you're with the white pieces and you have that small advantage out of the opening, and then things are starting to become a little bit more tricky. There's some traction. Your position starts getting worse and worse and worse. You no longer have an opening advantage. It evaporated a long time ago. Now what you have to do is shift your mentality from that, as white, you want to be a little bit better out of the opening and press your opponent for the whole game. That's the ideal scenario. Well, unfortunately, right now, it is your opponent with the black pieces that not only equalize, but has the advantage. You have to shift your mentality, get ready to defend, get ready to find the best defensive resources. And this is not something that Ding did in this game. And he was playing very fast, and I have to say, the nerves definitely felt like are playing mind tricks with Ding at this point. He played the move knight to c5. Bishop takes g2. By the way, just giving up a pawn like this, knight to c5. And he played it in less than, what is that, 30 seconds? Something along those lines. This was not a good moment, a golden moment for Ding. Bishop to f3 would, in fact, be the easy way. Not necessarily easy, but much easier way of equalizing this position. Let's say knight to g6 to try to go to e5, put some pressure on the bishop on f3. But once again, there's only one reason why I played this move, bishop to f3, and that is to exchange your newly founded best piece for black, the bishop on c6. It's such a beautiful piece. Defended, nice outpost, a lot of action on the long diagonal, a lot of targets as well for the bishop on c6. I have to exchange it as white. After knight to g6, probably you can go knight to d2, knight to c3, knight to c5 as well. Just exchange the bishops and you will be just fine with white. You'll be able to equalize. No problems whatsoever. He did not play this. He played the move knight to c5. And this was a huge mistake, just simply giving up the pawn on g2, which Nepo took, rightfully so. Rook to g1. And now another big moment in the game, another golden opportunity for Nepo. He played the move bishop to d5. The best move in the position was in fact to go bishop to c6. And we will understand the differences in just a second. Bishop to c6, b5, bishop to d5, and now e4. It looks like the bishop is trapped on d5. Well, you can still go to a2 and maybe to b1, but I will trap that bishop at some point, right? Bishop to b1 and rook to c1. Finally, the bishop is almost trapped. Not yet. Finally, I trap the bishop. You can look at this position after the move e4 and say, okay, I'm losing my bishop. Why would I do this? So I'm going to go just simply a bishop to d5 like he played in the game. Not so fast, because right now after e4 you have this extra move, extra resource in the position as black played the move b6. The difference, and this is key, and you can forget about these things, about these details when you calculate this type of positions, is if I take on d5, take on c5, you no longer have a pawn on b4 to take back with the pawn and make your pawn structure intact once again. You have to take back with a rook, but after rook takes d5 or e takes d5 as well, the knight will land on e6 with an attack on the rook on c5. This is not good. It's all about not only that black has an extra pawn, but also black enjoys the better structure in the position. So even if you manage to somehow recapture the pawn on d5 and restore the material balance, you will still have some problems due to the fact that you have so many pawn islands. 1, 2, 3 as well. Against 1, 2, 3, but I'm a pawn up, and if I lose this one, we're going to be 2 versus 3 pawn islands. You also have the doubled pawns. A lot of structural weaknesses for white. Definitely gives black a very pleasant, not decisive yet by any means, but a very pleasant edge. This was, once again, big opportunity missed by Nepo. Bishop to d5, e4, and of course, as we pointed out, after b6, take, I can just simply take back with the b pawn. This is a completely different situation, despite the fact that you have an extra pawn. After the move b4, I'm going to connect these b and c pawns, and this one, I have to say, is going to be very unpleasant for black. Still within the realms of equality, but this position not looking great for black. Definitely black doesn't have the advantage. Let's get back to the game. After the move e4, bishop to c6, b5, bishop to e8. In the position, you have to hide the bishop somewhere. Black is still enjoying a slight advantage. Nevertheless, a lot of his advantage has been lost. Knight takes b7, restoring the material balance. Rook to d4. Once again, Black still has the better pawn structure. Look at these double pawns. Look at this lonely guy on h4 that's going to be viciously attacked by the rooks coming on the 4th rank, starting with the rook coming to d4. This is still not outside of the realms of very dangerous realms for Ding. Let's see what happened. Rook to c4, rook to d7, knight to c5, and rook to c7. Rook to c3, you have to get this rook on a position that is protected by a pawn, because of course rook to c8 was a big threat. Not only that, you also need to defend the pawn on b5. And what's the best way of doing that? With the move rook to c3. Double purpose move makes a lot of sense. Rook to c3, rook to c8. And again, at this point, Ding had a good opportunity to potentially get some play in the position, equalize, at least from a dynamic perspective. And that was with the move knight to b7. Very, very strong in the move in the position. It looks awkward at first. Why would you put the knight back on b7? You just got attacked and kicked out by the move rook to c7. Well, there's a big difference, because right now I'm going towards the square d6 with my knight. If you do take the pawn, rook takes c3, take on c3, and rook takes c3. Of course, I'm not going to go knight to d6 first, because this would be a problem after rook to c1. I have to go bishop d1. It's looking a little bit passive for white. But what I can do is throw this extra move, king to d2. You go back. Now I go knight to d6. I'm putting a lot of pressure on your bishop on e8, which doesn't have a lot of squares, right? Rook to d7 is going to be met by e5. Cement that knight on d6. You have huge problems with the bishop on e8 right now, and I have a rook landing on the a file. And if I manage to capture somehow this pawn on a7, the pawn on b5 is going to run down the board, supported by the rook and the bishop coming on f3. That's going to be a queen. That's going to be all she wrote. And actually, Ding, I have to say, from a practical perspective, maybe objectively still equal. From a practical perspective, I give this position to Ding. Big opportunity with this move knight to b7, missed by the player from China. He played the move b4. I was looking at the game. b4 just felt like the more natural move. At the same time, you know, you're playing a world championship match with everything on the line. Game 14 out of 14. So at this point, you have to stop and you have to make the best decision. He played the move b4, which is problematic. After knight to d7, the best way for a white to continue was with this move king to d2. King to d2, just give up the pawn, which is not easy. Give up the pawn. Black will definitely take it, exchange, and just play for the initiative right now. Rook to b1, king to e3. Say that at some point we're going to exchange this pawn on b5 for the pawn on a7. We're going to exchange the bishops in the process as well, and that's going to be a 4 versus 3, which is most likely going to be a theoretical draw. Now, you have to be careful because you still have a stranded weakness on h4. So if you do that too quickly, for example, rook to a1, I can just simply take. Now, if you take on a7, I go rook to h5. You're too far away from the defense with the move king to g3, and now you're going to suffer. Maybe still not completely losing, but definitely going to suffer. In this particular case, actually, no, you're just simply completely losing right now. So you have to be careful. You still have some weaknesses. You have to improve the king first, and only after you will be able to exchange those pieces. He did not do that. He played the move rook to g3 quite quickly. Once again, big decision, played fast. Not a good sign. And at this point, Nepo had another golden up. I know, I've said it so many times in this recap. Nepo had a lot of opportunities in this game to close the match and win the title. He will go back to his team, and unfortunately, he will understand all of these missed opportunities, and he will not be happy with himself as we are getting ready for the playoffs. But a lot more on that later. So rook to g3, g6 was a very good move in the position. He did not play it. He played the move knight takes c5. Makes a lot of sense, but why not just simply defend the pawn on the g file and only after take on c5? The big problem is that, sure, you would love as white to be able to play the move h5, create problems, and create another weakness on g6. The problem is you don't have time. Rook to c1 is coming, and with the rook on d7, controlling the escape square for the king on d2, well, that's just simply almost a mating net. You're not getting mated yet, but you're losing everything in the position. Bishop to d1, gift me that rook as well. This is game over. Big opportunity with this move. Simple move, in fact, g6. I'm, to be honest, not 100% sure why he did not play this move. He played knight takes c5. Didn't even think for a very long time. Nepo. Rook takes g7. Well, you can take on c5, which he did first. You don't have time to play g6, of course, right now, because my pawns are connected. I go c6, and this is, in fact, a very good situation for white. The tables have reversed. But what black can do is take on c6, allow the rook to go to g7, and now the problem is these two rooks are kind of stranded, kind of stepping. Sure, they defend each other, but the action is going on the queen side. I'm going to pick up this pawn, and then I'm going to start moving my pawn down the a file. And once that happens, and you no longer, I put maybe a rook behind the pawn, you're going to be in trouble. You cannot get yourself involved in some sort of a race with rook to h7, first of all, because of rook to c1. And you have those type of problems as well on the back rank. The first rank in this case for white. Bishop to d1 is just simply too passive. I'm going to go rook to d8, attack the bishop on d1, king to e2, bishop takes b5. Everything comes with check. I'm going to pick up the bishop next move, and that's all she wrote. Black has a decisive advantage. So at this point, Ding had to find a solution. Maybe what he saw and what he envisioned was this particular case, and he said that, look, you will take on, all I had to do is just play the move bishop to d3, followed by rook to g3, get my king to a safe position in the middle of the board. At some point, you will get the pawn on b5, you will be a pawn up, but that's going to lead to a lot of simplifications. We're going to exchange the bishops. Maybe I will be able to exchange a pair of rooks as well in the process, and that's going to allow me to get close to a theoretical draw. 4 versus 3, as we will see happen in the game. But there were some pitfalls along the way. Let's take a look. Rook to d8, king to e2, rook to c3, very good move. Don't take on b5 first, because that's just simply going to allow what more or less happened in the game. As we will see, rook to g8, we exchange, and then this is a theoretical draw. Still not easy, as we will see, but a theoretical draw. Rook to c3, rook to g8, king to e7, rook to g3. Big moment, guys. Big moment in the position. We will see what Nepo played right now to spoil the advantage, which was in fact borderline winning at this point. What he could have done was rook to b3. This would have been a tremendous move. It's all about this idea. If you take on d3, I'm just simply going to take on e8, and I'm going to be able, after king to e8, rook takes d3, to be in time. Rook takes d3, first of all. Maybe you're starting to be worse because my king is more active in an equal pawn endgame. But after rook to b3, question is, what do you move? Can you move with a king on d2? Absolutely not. To start chasing my rook? No. Because after rook to d4, get this rook, and this is the plan. You want to get the rook off the 8th rank and then take on b5. And after rook to d4, unfortunately, king to e3 to attack the rook doesn't work because you're giving me the d3 square, the d3 bishop, and to be honest, king to c2, sure, you're attacking my rook, but rook db4, everything is active in the position for black. My rooks are beautiful. I'm ready to take on b5, ready to do a lot of damage with these two rooks against the king on c2. From a practical perspective, this is not a hopeless yet situation, but a very difficult defense for white. Rook to b3. If you try to engage in a race, you're going to take on b5. I'm going to take on h6. There's a problem. I'm right now going to take on d3. And after rook takes e8, you have to go rook takes e8, king takes c8, rook takes d3, rook takes b5. The problem is you no longer get behind my pawn, as happened in the game. We will see that once again in just a second. If you don't get behind my pawns, behind the pawn on the a file, of course, that is the passed pawn. That is the extra pawn for black. You don't have to get behind all of the pawns, but only one, that a pawn, the best pawn in the position. If you don't get behind it, you have a much more difficult defense ahead of yourself. And if, God forbidden, I manage to go a5, a4, rook to a5, and get my own rook behind the a pawn, then you're in big trouble as white. So you cannot do that. This would have been a much better version of what happened in the game for black, for Nepo. Let's see what happened in the game. e5 was the move. Rook to h8, rook to d6, a b6, very good move by a ding. Rook takes b6 solves some of the problems via tactical resources. Rook takes c8, king takes c8, bishop to b5, rook to c3. And now, sure, you can try to stop me from going behind the pawn, as Nepo did. The problem is you have too many weaknesses right now. And with the pawn on e5, you no longer have a good way to defend this pawn on f7. You cannot play the move with the pawn on e6. You could be potentially able to play the move f5. Without the pawn on e6, you cannot play the move f5. You have to defend the pawn on f7 with a king, but now I can just shuffle between these two threats. The threat of capturing the pawn on f7, the threat of going rook to c7 and getting at least behind the pawn, which happened in the game. a5, rook to c7. Now we have a theoretical draw in this game, but still not an easy one. King to f3, rook to a2, king to g3, h5, rook to a8, rook to a1, king to g2, a4. Black's only plan in the position is to push the pawn as fast as possible down the a file and try to create some problems like that. What you don't want as white is, for example, start getting close to this pawn, because right now, after a2, not yet completely lost. Actually, you're not yet lost. You're still within the realms of equality. But if this king would be on d3, you wouldn't have the safe way back home, where you're guarded, where you're covered by your own pawns with a move king to f3. Right now, there's no rook to f1 check, so you're not going to be able to capture my rook. If you go king to d3, rook to d1, this is a very typical way of dealing with this type of situations for black, promoting the pawn with the gain of the rook. This would be game over. So you have to be careful in the position as white, which he did. Rook to a5, f6, king to f3, a3, rook to a6, keep the king on g7 tied to the defense of the pawn on f6, king to f7. Black's only plan in the position is, of course, to approach the rook on the a file with the king and try to push the king down the board and support the a pawn. It's all about the a pawn, right? If I manage to get the king close to it and support it, then I might have some chances to take the full point home. Let's see what happened. King to e2, white is just waiting. King to e7, king to f3. We have the shuffling of the pieces for a little while. King to f7, king to f3, shuffle, 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 and finally, black decides to go king to d7. He's taking the long route towards the b7 square and towards the kicking of the white rook off the a file at the expense of a pawn, the pawn on f6, which Ding accepts the gift on f6. You have to accept it. You have to take that pawn. And we will see in just a second why. Rook to b2. Once you take the pawn, once you no longer guard the a pawn, I can transfer the rook from in front of the pawn, which is the worst position for the attacking rook, to the side of the pawn. Also, the pawn very close to promotion. Rook to a6, rook to b3. He could have played the move a2 as well. The problem is that right now, after king to g3, king to c7, f4, I managed to create my own threats in the position. And without my king being cut on the third rank, I will be able to exchange the last pawn. So for example, I take, you go king to b7. It's going to be a race that I'm not going to lose as white. I'm going to go king g5, take this pawn. And then even if you manage to take and force the capture of my rook for the a pawn, I will still have enough resources to make a draw. So let's get back to the position. Rook to b3, king to a g2, king to a c7. Right now, f4 is going to come at a much different cost, because without the king on the third rank that doesn't support the f4 push, you're going to just simply lose a pawn. But maybe it's a good loss. We will understand why in just a second. F4, the best move in the position, and in fact, at this point, the only move in the position. Very nicely spotted by Ding, and I have to say, this was the final time control for Ding. You don't make the time control, as you see on the screen. He has 14 minutes and 50 seconds against 41 minutes and 18 seconds for Nepo. Nepo is putting a lot of pressure on his opponent's clock. So you've made, this is move 64, you've made the second time control. You have 14 minutes and 50 seconds for the remainder of the game. But finally, you get some increment. You get 30 seconds every time you make a move. Still, Ding has to be paying close attention to what's happening on the clock. F4, you need to create your own passed pawn, and that is the E pawn at the expense of another pawn. E takes F4, E5, king to B7, rook to A4, king to C6, rook to A6, king to B5, rook to A7. I'm going to be able to push my pawn as well. Try to use that as a decoy to get some resources looking at my E pawn, and that's going to allow me to capture some of your pawns in the process. Let's see what happened. King to B6, for example. If you go rook to E3, and you're just saying that, hey, you're going to lose this E pawn. Yes, I will, but if you take it right now, I'm going to take on A3. That's going to be an easy draw for white. Even without the pawn on H4, this is still a draw. But what you can do as black is try to defend this pawn on A3 with the move king to B4. Now I have enough time to go E7, king to B3, and guess what? Now I have enough time and I'm just one tempo away. If my pawn would go to A2, I think this might in fact be problematic, but what you can do as white is just start giving checks. King to C2, check. King to B2, check. King to A1, that's okay. I can go rook to A7, A2, and now rook to B7. There's no way you're getting out with king to B2. I have enough of a threat in the position to always promote. This pawn on E7 is a tremendous asset, enough for white to have full equality in the position. So at this point, after this move, F4, and I have to say this was the last difficult, very difficult task for Ding, difficult puzzle to solve for Ding. Finally, he managed to secure the draw. King to B6, rook to A8, king to C5. You can try to attack my E5 pawn, but I'm going to be able to just go rook to A6, rook to A7, shuffle a little bit, king to F8, king to G2. You can take my pawn on E5 if you want, but this would be a trade that I'm always going to welcome in the position. The E pawn for the A pawn, 2 versus 1. You cannot win this one with the black pieces. It's just simply not impossible, but at this level, pretty much impossible. King to F2, rook to G3, king to F1, rook to C3, king to F2. Both players at this point know that there's no way any of the sides can make any progress. And after king to C7, E6, rook to A7, it's very important that you don't let the king go to E7, because after that, you might face some situations in which you might be placed into a Zugzwang occasion. Rook to A7, king to E8. Finally, Nepo accepts his fate. He's put a lot of pressure with the black pieces on his opponent, but it just wasn't meant to be. He didn't make the best out of his opportunities. Rook takes A3, rook to G6, and finally we have this position. King to E7, you're just simply too far away. Even if you would be able to defend both of these pawns with a king, let's say, landing on G5, that would still be a theoretical draw, because I'm just simply going to give you checks all around, all over the A file, and you're just simply not going to be able to hide the king. King to E6, rook takes F4, rook takes F4, and of course, we all know it's a very basic pawn endgame, but we might as well explain it. My king, even if I don't manage to go king to G5 and capture the pawn on H5, is just simply going to go to H1, and I'm just going to stay king H1, king G1, king H1, king G1, and make a draw. The guys decided that at this point, after the exchange of the rook on F4, call it a day. It's been a very long day. This went all the way down to the last time control. 8 hours or something along those lines these players played, and tomorrow we have a tiebreak. It's 7-7 going into the tie breaks. These players are just simply inseparable up to this point. Back and forth. Nepo took the lead in the match. Ding managed by a miracle out of a losing position to swindle Nepo and recover and equalize the match. I mean, this game, the last couple of games were just simply back and forth, back and forth. But fortunately for us, the spectators, maybe not fortunately for the players, because there's still a lot of tension lying on their shoulders. We will see a tie breaks tomorrow. We will be doing 4 games of a rapid chess, and whoever wins that wins the World Championship match. If it's draw after 4 games of rapid, we're going to move on to the Blitz. And after the Blitz, if it's still equal in score, we're going to move on to an Armageddon. At least I believe these are the tie breaks regulations. If they're not, don't blame me too much. It's been a long day for me as well. I just finished a tournament, in fact, here in Romania. I think it was the first tournament I played on Romanian soil, which is my home country, for over a decade. So it was definitely an interesting experience. I had a lot of fun, scored 3.5 out of 4, still 5 rounds to go tomorrow. But tomorrow we will also crown a new world champion. So that's it for me tonight. Tomorrow, surely we will have Fabi back in the saddle. I'm excited for that as well. Guys, see you tomorrow.